Animology is brought to you by you, the listeners of this podcast. If you'd like Animology to show up in your earbuds each week, please go to patreon.com/Colleen Patrick-Goudreau to help us reach our goal. For just $10 a month, that's about 30 cents a day, you can make this podcast possible and get written transcripts to each and every episode of Animology. For just $1 a day, you get that and more, including bonus material, bonus episodes, and behind-the-scenes sneak peeks. So go to patreon.com/Colleen Patrick-Goudreau to become a listener supporter. Whatever level you choose, thank you for helping change the way we talk and think about animals. Welcome to Animology, a podcast about the animal-related words and expressions we use every day and how they affect and reflect our relationship with animals. Today's episode is Don't Get My Goat, or Buck the Trend. I'm not kidding. In this episode, we'll explore the many goat and goat-related words and expressions we use in our everyday language. You're going to love it. I kid you not. Get it? Hi everyone, Colleen Patrick-Goudreau here. I am the proud author of several books. I'm the producer and host of the Food for Thought podcast. I'm an animal advocate and speaker and self-professed zoolinguophile. You can find all of my work at ColleenPatrickGoudreau.com or just go straight to animologypodcast.com where you can add your comments, questions, and link to iTunes to write your review. Thank you very much. In the episode Zodiac, A Circle of Animals, I promised I had an episode for you all about goats. And so here we are, and this is just one of them. I don't like playing favorites when it comes to animals, but if you were to press me to pick a favorite animal, it's so hard. Next to cats, I can't pick. But let's just say I love goats for all the reasons everyone loves goats. They're playful, they're spunky, they're sassy, they're brave, they're strong, they're social, intelligent, vocal, and they're really cute. Most of us living in Western countries don't really have the opportunity to see goats in the wild, but many of us have had the experience of seeing or meeting domesticated goats. In fact, goats were one of the first animals, along with sheep, to be domesticated about 11,000 years ago. And that long history of living so closely among one another has certainly produced many goat-related words and phrases in the English language, and probably in other languages as well. In the Zodiac episode, in the section on the constellation Capricorn, I shared with you that the word goat is from Old English. The earliest written records we have of the word goat are from about 700. And interestingly, originally, the word goat denoted only the females of the genus Capra. Male goats were called bucks. As early as 1000, the year 1000, we see the word goat buck, meaning male goat. And we see the terms he goat and she goat appear at the end of the 1300s to distinguish between the two sexes. And we see nanny goat and billy goat appear in the 18th and 19th centuries, respectively, to do the same, to distinguish between the male and the female. As for the origins of the word buck, Old English buk, B-U-C, and bucca, B-U-C-C-A, are both documented in writing as far back as the year 1000. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, the evidence indicates that Old English buk, B-U-C, was used for the male deer, and bucca, B-U-C-C-A, was used for the he-goat. But the instances are so few that it's not certain they were actually distinguished in meaning. By the 11th century, however, they were, in fact, so indistinguishable that the word buck is now used as the designation for many male mammals. Thus, the word buck is used to refer to male deer and male goats, but also male antelope, kangaroos, mice, and rabbits. So male goats today tend to be called bucks or billies, and females are called nannies or does. And whereas buck is a common term for the male of many species of mammal, like I just named, doe is the same term we use now to refer to many female mammals, such as those I already mentioned above, deer, antelope, kangaroos, mice, and rabbits. So doe is used for the female for these animals, buck is used for the male, as well as caribou, gerbils, hares, squirrels, hamsters, rats, and sheep. The females are all called does when we use that term at all. The word butcher, to mean one who kills and prepares animals for human consumption, came into English around 1300 or appears in print around that time from an old French word boucher, meaning executioner, which is itself based on the Provençal word boc, B-O-C, meaning buck, in reference to a male goat. Before English speakers adopted the French word boucher and made it their own in butcher, they would have used the Old English word fleischmongere, or fleshmonger, from fleisch, meaning flesh, plus mongere, which means merchant, trader, or broker. So the point is, before English speakers used the word butcher, they would have had their own word for someone who traded in the flesh of animals and who killed animals for their flesh. And that would have been fleischmongere or fleshmonger. Now, in subsequent episodes, we're going to spend time talking about the words flesh and meat. In Old English, fleisch meat or flesh meat would have been the common term to refer to the flesh of animals used for human consumption. The word meat would not have been sufficient to denote the flesh of an animal because the word meat, or Old English meta, referred to food in general. And we're going to talk more about this fascinating history in another episode. But the word butcher, to refer to one who kills brutally or indiscriminately, has been used since the 1500s. So the earliest denotations of the word butcher, referring to animals being slaughtered, gets developed into a person being a brutal killer, a butcher, possibly coming about from the meaning of that original French word, boucher, which meant an executioner. Now, in English, the word butcher predates the word executioner to refer to the person whose job it was to inflict capital punishment or torture, the one who deals the final blow in an execution. Butcher first appears in print in this context in 1483. Executioner isn't used in this context until the 16th century. So from buck, meaning he-goat, we get butcher, meaning one who kills animals, to butcher, meaning one who kills or tortures people, to butcher, meaning one who kills brutally or indiscriminately. And of course, we use the term butcher to refer to something that we botch. So someone butchers an accent or butchers a word, for instance. Butcher, of course, also became a common family name in England, which first reached England following its conquest by the Normans in 1066. It was originally an occupational surname used to identify a person who worked as a butcher, a killer of animals for human consumption, which now is simply a common surname. So if your last name is Butcher, you can be sure you had fleshmongers, butchers, as ancestors. Incidentally, the word butcher was sometimes abbreviated to butch, which in the early 1900s referred to a young man who acted tough or macho, someone who acted butch, and could also be the origin of its meaning of the slang butch to refer to a lesbian of masculine appearance or behavior, which came into English in the 1940s. So very interesting history there in this word butcher. There's also an interesting use of the word butcher in the now obsolete term candy butcher from the 1800s. It was the name for a concessionaire who hawked and sold sweets and candy and drinks, and eventually magazines on trains, at state fairs, in stadiums, and in movie theaters. It was a very popular profession for young boys during its time, and apparently Thomas Edison was a candy butcher servicing railroad passengers when he was a young boy. There are some apocryphal stories about how the name came about, including one about a butcher in the fleshmonger sense, the animal carver sense, who started selling candy instead of selling animal meat and was able to make enough money to change professions and focus on candy mongering rather than flesh mongering. But they kept the word butcher in the title, even in this new context. We don't know if that's exactly true, but we do know it was a term that has now gone out of favor, though the profession has not. We still see people walking around with trays, hawking their wares at baseball games and the like, but today they're called concessionaires. And finally, we have terms like butcher block and butcher knife and butcher paper, all of which originated in the animal slaughter space, but which remain with us today, even though there's no animal blood on the chopping block, on the knife, or on the paper. If you're not comfortable with these terms, and some people are not because they feel so connected to killing animals, then we already have phrases that express the same thing. Instead of butcher block, we have cutting block or chopping block or kitchen block or cutting board. Instead of butcher knife, we have chef's knife, utility knife, or kitchen knife. Originally sold to butchers for the purpose of wrapping bits of meat and fish up in, butcher paper is now used for a wide variety of purposes, notably in schools where it's used for arts and crafts. It's a cheap but sturdy paper that's sold in large rolls. Of course, it's basically craft paper or paperboard, so we could say craft paper instead of butcher paper if we like. Of course, there's also butcher birds, large magpie-like birds who get their name from their habit of impaling their captured prey, mostly insects, on a thorn. And before we leave the word butcher, you might be interested in my Food for Thought podcast, in which I have an episode in which I talk about the many vegetarian and vegan butchers cropping up around, I was going to say country, but really around the world, and how I feel about the use of the word butcher in relation to those who create plant-based foods. So you can take a listen to that episode. Now, I'm not sure if you noticed, but this many episodes into the Animology podcast, I hope your ear is attuned to animologies. I used the expression hawking their wares twice, wondering if you would hear the hawk in there. If you did, bravo, but it has nothing to do with the beautiful raptors, even though it's spelled the same, H-A-W-K. If you want to know more about words and expressions related to hawks and raptors specific to the blood sport of falconry, I recommend the falconry episode. And of course, you receive the transcript for it and every single episode of Animology if you are a supporter at $10 and above. So thanks to everybody who is a supporter. You can become one at patreon.com/Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. And thank you to everyone at every level, including our platinum supporters, David Cabrera and Alexander Gray, Victoria Grenier, Michal Stone, Gwen Mayo, Ranjini Mohan, Jennifer and Ben Ellis, Ulrich, Renee Marinkovich, Tim Anderson, Sylvia Raquel, Sherry Lupiton, Kenda English, Jennifer Watkins, and Jenny McCracken. Check out the various Patreon levels at animologypodcast.com by clicking on donate and pick the one that's right for you. You can also go straight to patreon.com/Colleen Patrick-Goudreau to review and sign up. Thank you, everyone. Now, as I said, the word butcher came from the French word boucher, which came from the word buck. The word buck shows up in many words and expressions, some of them, however, being related to the adult male deer, not the adult male goat, such as in the word buck as a slang for dollar. And I'm going to save those expressions for other episodes on deer-related words and phrases. But there are some that come from our male goat, buck. We use the word buck as a verb to mean to strongly resist or rise up against something, such as in the common phrase, to buck a trend. It means to rise up against the norm. We use it as a verb to mean to charge forward with determination, as in to buck the odds. To buck the odds is to charge ahead in spite of the odds. We use it as a verb to mean to strive forward with determination, as in bucking for a promotion, or when you're told to buck up, to pull yourself together despite whatever is pulling you down. We use it to mean to make sudden, jerky, jolting movements, as when a car bucks because it's running out of gas, or to leap upward while arching the back, such as when a horse bucks when he's afraid or when he's trying to throw someone off his back. All of these uses have to do with the awesome strength, obstinacy, and determination of male goats, which is one of the reasons I love goats. The origin of buck tooth a word that came into English in the mid-1500s to mean a prominent projecting upper front tooth, might relate to the kicking up of a buck, of a male goat, or might even be named for the protruding front teeth of a goat or even of a rabbit, because don't forget, buck refers to male rabbits as well. And both goats and rabbits have protruding front teeth. Another reason they're both just absolutely adorable. A sawbuck is a U.S. name for a device that holds wood so you can cut it into pieces. You've probably seen sawbucks. In Canada and Britain, the same device is called a sawhorse. In the United States, however, a sawhorse is something a little different. It's a beam with 4 legs used to support a board for sawing, and it kind of looks like the legs of an animal. In certain dialects, it's also known as a mule, and a short sawhorse is known as a pony. So we've got animals all over the place here. As you may know, sawbuck is also a slang term for a $10 bill in the United States, kind of going out of favor. I don't think a lot of people use the term sawbuck much anymore, but you might hear it in an old 50s film. And it's derived from the similarity between the X shape of a sawbuck device and the Roman numeral X, which is 10. So that's how sawbuck came about, also having to do with goats. Now, moving on from buck for male goat, the Proto-Indo-European root gaido meant young goat, and it's related to the Latin haedus, meaning kid, K-I-D, which is, of course, what we still call a young goat. We call them a kid. The use of the word kid to mean child, being a metaphorical connection to and sharing the same root as kid meaning young goat, is first recorded as slang in the 1620s and accepted as part of familiar speech by the 19th century. The word kidnap came into English in the late 1600s, combining this use of the word kid plus nap, which meant to snatch or seize. And of course, today it means to abduct a person or an animal, to kidnap someone. It originally referred to carrying off children or people in general in order to provide servants or laborers for American plantations. Pretty scary. The verb kid, as in to tease or joke for fun, didn't come into English until the early 19th century, and it alludes to the playfulness of both children, young children called kids, and young goats called kids. And of course, from there it evolved to kidding, as in you've got to be kidding and no kidding. On a less playful note, for the animals, kid is also seen in the terms kid leather and kid gloves, referring to the soft leather made from the skin of young goats. So to treat someone with kid gloves is to treat them with sensitivity and great care. Would that the living goats were treated with such care, or the sheep for that matter, because kid leather was first made from the skin of lambs in the 18th century, the wearing of which would indicate your wealth and social status. It's amazing what denotes social status in our world. It's so interesting, and you can listen to the falconry episode to hear more about that as a status symbol. Gloves made from kid leather, being soft and delicate, weren't used for domestic chores, as it were. So they signified that the wearer, whether be a man or a woman, led a genteel life of leisure. The first mention of kid gloves are from England in the 1730s, and many considered them ostentatious and garish, so much so that the gloves themselves almost went out of favor. And to be kid-gloved came to be used as an insult, implying a lack of manliness. Over time, the gloves and the wearing of them took on a positive spin, and the expression to handle with kid gloves, as we use it today, to mean to handle with care, first appeared in print in the 1800s. Now, of course, today, millions of goats and sheep are killed for their hair, for their milk, for their flesh, for their skin. And according to the USDA slaughter statistics, nearly 2.7 million sheep and lambs and 1 million goats were slaughtered in 2015 in the United States alone. And sometimes, especially in smaller slaughter operations, a trained goat leads the other goats to their own slaughter, while his own life is spared so that he may lead others again and again. He's called the Judas goat, sometimes also known as the Judas sheep, a term that refers to the biblical character Judas Iscariot. The slaughter industry exploits the natural herding instincts and gregariousness of goats and sheep and trains the Judas goats to lead other animals, not just other goats, but goats and other animals, to specific pens, onto trucks, and to slaughter. This method has also been used to track and slaughter large populations of feral animals, with the Judas goat driving out other goats to be targets for the hunters until all of the individuals are killed. As an expression, Judas goat is used in the general pejorative sense to refer to someone who betrays others in order to survive themselves. Another common goat-related word we use is scapegoat, to mean someone who's punished for the faults of others. Though they're innocent, a scapegoat suffers for the wrongs of another, generally as a way of distracting attention from the real culprit or the real problem. The word scapegoat and its meaning have their roots in the Bible, in the Moses story. God tells Moses that Aaron, his son, is to atone for his sins by sacrificing various animals, among them 2 goats, mandating that one be slaughtered as an offering and the second be allowed to escape after everyone symbolically lays their sins on him during the Day of Atonement, during Yom Kippur. From Leviticus 16, verses 7 through 10, and Aaron shall cast lots upon the 2 goats, one lot for the Lord and the other for the scapegoat. The goat who escapes was called an escape goat or free goat, caper emissarius, to use the Latin phrase. But this appears now to be a mistranslation of the word. When William Tyndale was translating Leviticus from Hebrew into his early modern English, he wasn't familiar with a word that meant escape, and he used scape instead, and thus coined the term scapegoat. The word was appropriated in the King James version of the Bible, and the word became entrenched in the English language, but you'll not see scape in any other context like that, because it really was just used in this context here. Like the innocent goat who has the sins of the community placed upon him, a whipping boy is someone who is punished for the sins of others, a non-animal term that means the same thing. Another goat word, a goatee. A goatee is a small chin beard connected to a mustache and sometimes trimmed to a point. It's named for its resemblance to a male goat's beard. They're very handsome on both. But I may be biased because my husband has had a goatee for years, and I love the little beards on goats. They're so cute. If you've never petted a goat and their goatee, it's just adorable. To get someone's goat is a common, colorful figurative slang expression, meaning to irritate someone, to annoy and arouse someone to anger, that first appeared in print in the United States in 1909 in a U.S. newspaper, the Stevens Point Daily Journal, and in 1910 by none other than writer and, might I add, fellow animal advocate and fellow Oaklander Jack London. I say animal advocate because of his position and activism against animals made to perform for circuses. To spread awareness to the public about performing animals, he wrote 2 novels. One was called Jerry of the Islands, and one was called Michael, brother of Jerry, in the foreword of which he wrote, "I have a strong stomach and a hard head, but what turns my head and makes my gorge rise is the cold-blooded, conscious, deliberate cruelty and torment that is manifest behind 99 of every 100 trained animal turns. Cruelty as a fine art has attained its perfect flower in the trained animal world. And because of the awareness he created, the public spoke up. And in 1925, Ringling, Barnum, and Bailey Circus withdrew all trained animal acts from their performance schedules and remained animal-free for almost 5 years. Unfortunately, they were brought back. But guess what? As I was finishing up this episode and getting ready to record, on January 14th, 2017, Feld Entertainment, who's the owner of Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus, announced that they were shutting their doors for good, reflecting the trend toward and a public taste for animal-free circuses and proving that the arc of history does indeed bend toward compassion. It's monumental news, as it means thousands of wild animals will be spared from performing archaic and cruel acts, such as standing on their heads or jumping through fiery hoops. And of course, it means future animals will not be subjected to this. It is the end of a violent era, and it is indeed a victory for animals. But back when Jack London coined the phrase to get someone's goat, he was instrumental in persuading the circus to get animals out of the circus. And here we are in 2017, about 100 years later, and it looks like it's happened for good. There's more work to be done, but that's another conversation. Our expression to get someone's goat, meaning to rouse someone's ire, would have most likely existed in the verbal vernacular, of course, prior to its appearance in print. And indeed, the first time we see its use outside of the US, in the UK, in 1924, we get the sense that it's still a relatively new phrase. It appears in the first non-US publication by British author John Galsworthy, who uses it in his story, White Monkey. Now, I have to also say that John Galsworthy was also a voice for animals in his own right. He was an English novelist and a playwright who lived from 1867 to 1933. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1932, and he's best remembered for his sequence of novels, The Forsyte Saga, which I've read, and of course it was made into a miniseries, which is quite good. I recommend it. He was also a committed social activist and an outspoken advocate for the women's suffrage movement, for prison reform, and for animal welfare. And this is reflected in a lot of his writing, not only in some of his poems, but also within his larger and more known works, such as in the Forsyte Saga, particularly in the first novel called The Man of Property. He also gave a speech in 1913 for the London for the Animals' Friends Society called Treatment of Animals during a meeting to protest the cruel treatment of performing animals. I'll include links to some of these writings on the show notes for today's episode. So that is to get someone's goat. And there are some pretty apocryphal stories as to how get someone's goat or get my goat came to mean to rouse to anger or irritation, but there's no evidence for any of them, and I don't want to perpetuate them here. I do think they're urban myths or rural myths at this point. It appears just to be a colorful expression, possibly having to do with the alliteration created in the hard G sounds to get someone's goat. Of course, goat or old goat is a slang for a lecherous man, which does injustice to goats, methinks. The term goat drunk means to be lascivious from drink, referring to medieval folklore, which distinguished successive stages of drunkenness. And to act the goat or play the giddy goat means to behave in a silly or foolish way, sometimes in order to make people laugh. Now, goats can be pretty silly. I've seen them be pretty silly numerous times. So if anyone acts the goat, it is definitely the goats. Finally, there's the idiom to separate the sheep from the goats, meaning to distinguish the people or things of high quality from those of mixed quality. Though frankly, I've never been able to figure out which animal is supposed to be the higher and which is supposed to be the lower, since I think both animals are pretty awesome. If you have that same problem, we've already got a non-animal idiom in separate the men from the boys. And that, my friends, is where we're going to end it, even though we're not even done. We're done with words related to the English words goat and buck and kid specifically, and the phrases and expressions that contain these words. But do you know how many words in English derive from other root words for goat? In the Zodiac episode, in the discussion about the constellation Capricorn, I talked about the word caper, which is Latin for goat. So we have to talk about words that come from that root. Words like cabriolet, cab, caprice, capricious, and caper. And we have Greek roots for goat that form common words in English. It's amazing, but we're going to have to save those for another day, and we will come back to goats. Until then, I hope you enjoyed this episode and that you will be a voice for goats. They have certainly given voice to us through the many goat-related words and expressions we use every day. May they be in our thoughts as often as they are on our lips. This is Colleen Patrick-Goudreau for the goats, for the animals, for the kids. Thank you for listening and supporting Animology, changing the way we talk and think about animals.